The first lie you learn in war is that the paper knows everything. The second lie is that it matters. My name is Thomas Hale, Staff Sergeant Rifle Squad Leader, United States Army. In the autumn of 1944, my platoon was pushing through a gray French valley that smelled like wet iron. We had orders to take a low ridge before first light. The map said the ground rolled easy. The captain called it a speed bump. Secure it. Dig in. Wait for armor. We marched by the light of shuttered lamps in a sky so thick with cloud it felt like a lid. Mud clung to our boots. Our breath showed white. Somewhere to our right, a battery of our own guns thumped a slow heartbeat. I kept count without meaning to. 1, 2, 3. Then the pause that says someone is loading again. The ridge rose in front of us like a shrug in the earth. Not even a hill, not really. A child could have drawn it with a dull pencil. Russo said it looked like a sleeping cow. Chen said it looked like trouble. Doc gave me a look that asked the question he would not say out loud. Are we walking into something we do not see? I checked the map again by cupping my hand over the lens. The paper showed a gentle line, a notch, then the village road. No contour that warned of cliffs. No mark that shouted enemy positions. The ridge had no name. It had no number. It was a thing the paper barely admitted was there. We reached the first rise and the wind shifted. I caught a smell that did not belong to wet fields. Hot metal, old smoke, oil. I raised a fist and felt the squad fold into the ground like we had practiced 1,000 times. Boots went quiet. Voices went quiet. Even the rain seemed to hush. I crawled forward and pressed my cheek to the soil. The earth was scarred with shallow grooves that ran across the slope. Not from plows, not from cattle. From wire being dragged, from stakes being hammered in. My fingers found a shard of wood and a twist of barbed wire still bright where it had been cut. My stomach sank. The hill was not on the map, but someone had been building here. I slid back and signaled the men up by twos. We moved like a hinge, slow and careful. Russo and Big Walt crawled to my left. Chen and Doc held the center. Little Morales watched our rear with the radio. The set clicked in his hands like a nervous tooth. He kept the antenna low and his voice lower. I told him to keep it on whisper. He nodded and said, "Yes, Sarge." Whisper it is. We started to skirt the slope for a better angle. That was when the ground under my palm changed. Dirt gave way to packed stones. My hand touched a lip of poured concrete. I traced it and felt a sharp right angle. No farmer builds that. I let the shape tell me a story. A box sunk into the earth, a slit up top, a field of fire laid down the hill like a ruler. A pillbox, small, clever, hidden under grass stitched back into place. I signed halt. Everyone melted flat. The wind shifted again. From the slit came a thread of warm air that smelled of food and tobacco. The enemy was awake, maybe 2 men, maybe 3. Faces inches from the outside world that did not know they were there. Watching a path our paper said was clear. I breathed slow and counted heartbeats. My mouth tasted like coins. I passed the hand signal to Chen. He slid off to our right like a shadow, then froze. He had found something else. Another edge of concrete. Another mouth cut into the hill. This one angled to cover the first. 2 pillboxes. Speaking to each other without words. I wanted to swear. I did not. The men were listening to my silence. I crawled back to Morales and tapped the radio. He winced like it was a living thing. I told him to give me the captain on the net, soft as breath. He worked the handset with fingers that did not shake, which is why I had him. The answer came back a whisper with teeth. Proceed to objective. Report secure by 0430. I stared at the black lump of the hill and felt time lean against my back. The map said, speed bump. The hill said otherwise. The hill said I have eyes. There is a moment before the first shot where a man can still choose. He can call the mission impossible. He can fall back and argue the case. He can wait for daylight and bring the guns. Or he can move because the men behind him are already in the shadow of the thing and a choice delayed becomes a choice made. I chose to move. We peeled off our packs and left them in a shallow fold of ground. We kept what mattered. Ammo, grenades, knives that were mostly tools but felt like promises. I told Russo to take the left slit. Chen would mark the right with a grease pencil if he could reach it. Doc would stay in the low ground with Morales and the radio. Big Walt watched our high left in case the hill had more mouths. I looked up the slope. The grass was slick. The rain had turned it into a skin. I could see the dark line of the first firing slit now that I knew where to look. It was a narrow smile that did not reach the eyes. I touched the dirt and whispered the only prayer I still remembered from before the war. Then I gave the signal. Crawl. Slow. Keep your belly on the earth. We went up toward a hill the paper did not believe in, and the hill waited for us like it had been waiting a long time. Dawn was still an hour away, but the hill already felt awake. You learn to hear the difference between dead ground and living ground. Dead ground just waits under you. Living ground listens. We crawled until the earth pressed cold against our cheekbones. My elbows slid in mud that smelled of wet leaves and gun oil. Russo was a few feet ahead, broad shoulders hunched like a boulder trying to be smaller than a pebble. Chen moved to my right, cat quiet even with a full kit. Behind us, Doc shifted with the radio, and Morales crouched so low I could barely see the curve of his helmet. The first shot wasn't ours. It never is. A single crack snapped the air and flattened us all at once. A splinter of dirt spat into my eye. I blinked it away, heart pounding so hard it felt like my ribs might crack. The flash had come from the first pillbox, just a whisper of light through the slit, but enough to tell me we'd been spotted. "Stay flat," I hissed, low enough for only Russo to hear. His answering grunt said he already knew. Another shot cracked, this one kicking mud inches from Chen's boot. The angle was low, a warning or a test. I couldn't tell. We'd crept into the teeth of the hill and the teeth were starting to bite. I slid my rifle forward, the sling scraping softly against wet grass. My fingers found the grenade on my belt, but I didn't pull it. Too soon, too loud. We needed the first move to count. Russo shifted closer until I could smell his damp wool jacket. "Sarge," he whispered, "we can smoke the slit. Got 2 frags left." I shook my head. "Not till we see how many. Wait for my mark." The rain thickened into a drizzle that beaded on our helmets and slid down our necks. It muffled sound, a small mercy. Through the wet curtain I watched the slit. A faint shape moved inside, a head maybe, turning away. For a moment I hoped they hadn't fixed our exact position. A low whisper came from Morales on the radio. "Command wants a sit rep over." I pressed my mouth to the handset without lifting my head. "Tell him we're in contact, 2 pillboxes minimum, still moving." Morales repeated it, voice steady as stone, then sank back into the grass. We shifted left inch by inch, trying to find a blind spot in the field of fire. My knees ached from the crawl. The mud sucked at my elbows. Every time I moved, I expected a bullet to pluck me out of the wet ground like a weed. Then a flare hissed up from behind the ridge. Green light bloomed over us, turning the drizzle into silver needles. For a heartbeat, we froze, caught in the glow like animals in a torch beam. I heard Russo curse under his breath. The flare drifted down slow, spinning on its tiny parachute. I whispered the only order that made sense. "Down! Don't move! Let it die!" The green light faded at last, leaving the hill dark again, but I knew our luck had thinned. The enemy wouldn't throw up a flare for no reason. A burst of automatic fire confirmed it. It tore across the slope in a flat arc, low and searching, chewing up grass a few yards to our right. The gunner was sweeping blind, but close enough to smell us. "Walt," I breathed, barely moving my lips. "Cover left. Russo, prep your frag. Chen, you mark the second slit when I give the word." We waited for the next sweep. When it came, Russo's arm snapped forward and the grenade sailed in a low arc, vanishing through the slit like a stone dropped down a well. The explosion that followed was small, almost polite. Just a muffled thump and a puff of dust. But the gun went silent. The pillbox's first mouth was shut. No one cheered. We knew better. The hill answered back with a second burst from the other slit. Harder, angrier, a stream of red tracers stitching the dark. We flattened again as bullets raked the mud inches above our helmets. Chen wiped rain from his face with a muddy sleeve, then pulled a stub of white grease pencil from his pocket. Still lying flat, he sketched a quick cross on a smooth rock and nudged it forward toward me. The mark pointed toward the second slit. Our next target. I nodded and tapped his shoulder. "Good. Next run, we crawl that way." Behind us, Morales murmured into the radio again, keeping it to a whisper. I heard the faint crackle of the captain's reply. Too soft to make out the words, but Morales' face told me enough. Reinforcements weren't coming yet. We were on our own. I felt the hill breathing under my chest, the way the cold ground pulsed with the vibration of the second gun firing short bursts to keep us pinned. We'd traded one threat for another, and the darkness was thinning. The eastern sky was starting to gray. We had minutes before daylight bled across the valley and turned our cover into nothing. I looked at the men, mud-streaked faces, eyes wide but steady. Russo checked his last grenade. Chen tightened the strap on his helmet. Big Walt rested his cheek against the stock of his rifle, sight fixed on the marked slit. Morales kept whispering into the radio like a man, talking to a stubborn ghost. Doc pressed flat to the ground, one hand near his medic bag, waiting for the first scream. I drew a slow breath that tasted of wet earth and gunpowder. Next crawl, we take the second mouth, I said softly, before the sun finds us. The hill hadn't given up yet, but neither had we. The second pillbox wasn't quiet for long. We'd barely shifted 10 yards when it spat a burst that shaved grass just ahead of my hand. The rounds hissed past like hornets chewing dirt from the slope. We hit the ground so hard I felt the mud squeeze between my teeth. "Stay down," I whispered, my own breath fogged against the wet earth. The gunner inside knew roughly where we were, but not exactly, which meant he was probing. That bought us seconds, not much more. Chen's grease mark on the rock pointed upslope toward a clump of brambles. Beneath that thicket lay the second firing slit. From here it was just a dark shadow, invisible if you didn't know to look. I passed the hand signal. Flank right. We crawled in a slow arc, using the rain and darkness as our last allies. Russo led, keeping low and tight, dragging his rifle on the sling rather than risk the scrape of metal on stone. Big Walt followed, his bulk moving surprisingly soft, like a bear stalking in marsh grass. I stayed between them, eyes never leaving the dark slit. Halfway there, a mortar shell whistled over and burst behind us near the lower slope. The blast punched the air out of my lungs and showered us with cold mud. We hadn't called for smoke or artillery. That meant the enemy was calling for support of their own. Doc muttered something that might have been a prayer. I didn't answer. I was too busy counting the seconds between whistles. 1, 2, 3. Another burst, this one farther off, as if they were bracketing for range. The hill wasn't just awake. It was calling friends. "Morales," I hissed back toward the rear. "Tell command they've got mortars up. We need smoke, anything." He whispered into the handset, but static answered him. The drizzle and the hill's bulk were eating our signal alive. We pushed forward again, stomachs in the mud, every muscle trembling from the cold. By the time we reached the bramble patch, dawn had begun to smudge the horizon in faint gray. The darkness that had hidden us was lifting like a curtain. Russo was closest to the slit now. He eased a grenade from his pouch, rolled it gently in his palm to scrape off the wet mud. He gave me a look that asked for the go-ahead. I held up a flat palm. Not yet. Inside the pillbox, we could hear muffled voices. German, 2 of them arguing over something. A clink of metal. The scrape of boots against the floor. I waited for the pause between words. A tiny silence that felt like an open door. I dropped my palm. Russo lobbed the grenade in a clean, low arc. We all pressed flat. The blast was sharper than the first one. The slit spat dust and smoke. For a second, there was no return fire, only a faint coughing sound from inside. Big Walt rose to a crouch, weapon ready, but I motioned him down. "You don't charge a pillbox unless you're sure it's dead." The smoke cleared on the next gust of wind, and the gun remained silent. No movement. No more voices. 2 mouths of the hill shut. "Clear?" Chen whispered. "Clear for now," I said, though I didn't believe it. "Move up. Stay low." We crawled past the pillbox, rifles aimed into the open slit in case someone inside was only playing dead, but there were no more shots. Only a faint, acrid smell of burned cordite and damp concrete. From higher up the slope came the low grinding sound of machinery, the unmistakable metallic whine of a turret being turned. My gut turned cold. The hill had another set of teeth. I motioned halt and ducked behind a jagged outcrop of stone that jutted like a broken tooth. We huddled there, mud-slick and panting, while I tried to peer upward through the drizzle. Between the grass blades and fog, I glimpsed a dark, boxy silhouette, the outline of a machine gun nest perched at the crest. "They've got elevation on us," I murmured. "That's why the map didn't show it. They built it into the rise, Russo spat rainwater. "So what now, Sarge? We crawl the rest of the way up and pray? Pray on your own time," I said. "Right now we flank left. If we can get under their gun, they can't angle down enough to hit us." The drizzle had turned into a steady rain that cut thin streams through the mud. Our uniforms were soaked and heavy. Every movement felt twice as hard. We started crawling again, hugging the stones and small hollows carved by water, inching closer to the nest above. Behind us, Morales was still fighting the radio, cursing softly at the static. The last thing I heard before we crested the next rise was him muttering, "They can't hear us. Nobody can hear us." We reached a ledge just below the final crest. I risked a quick glance over the edge and saw the enemy position clearly for the first time. A sandbag nest bristling with a belt-fed MG-42, its barrel glinting wet under the dawn light. Two helmets bobbed behind it, silhouettes against the paling sky. The hill had saved its worst for the top. I dropped back down beside the men, my heart hammering so loud I feared the enemy might hear it. "Two up top," I whispered. "They've got us boxed. We take that nest or we don't take the hill." For a long breath, none of us spoke. The rain drummed on our helmets, the sound steady as a ticking clock. The men looked to me, waiting for a plan I didn't yet have. I glanced toward the dark woods beyond the crest where the rest of the company should have been forming up behind us. No sign of them, just mist rolling off the valley. The hill loomed over us, wet and dark and alive, and I understood why it hadn't been on the map. Some things don't want to be found. The rain eased near dawn, leaving the hill slick and shining like oiled stone. The fog thinned, rolling down the far side of the slope, and the sky above the ridge took on the first blue-gray wash of morning. That was when the world seemed to hold its breath. We crouched in the shallow dip just below the crest. 10 feet above us, the machine gun nest crouched behind a wall of sandbags, its barrel tilted just enough to rake the approach. We could hear the belt feed being slapped back into place, the muted rattle of someone chambering a round. The enemy was awake and ready. I wiped water from my eyes with the back of my sleeve and turned to the squad. "Two gunners," I whispered. "Nest is dug in tight. We take it fast or we don't take it at all. Walt, you've got the bar. You light them up soon as Russo throws his frag. Chen, you back him with rifle fire. Doc, you stay low and keep Morales covered." Russo gave me a tight grin that said he was ready but not happy. He checked the last pin on his grenade. Walt hefted the Browning automatic rifle, the heavy weapon cradled against his chest like a stubborn child. Chen slid a fresh clip into his M1 Garand and nodded once. The air was damp and cold enough that our breath still steamed. I felt the ache in my elbows from hours of crawling, the drag of wet wool on my shoulders. The hill's slope above us seemed to rise forever, even though it was barely 10 feet. I counted down on my fingers. 3, 2, 1. Russo went first, hurling the grenade over the lip of the crest with a clean, low throw. The rest of us flattened against the mud as the weapon clattered against sandbags and rolled inside. The blast came with a muffled thump, sending up a puff of dirt and smoke. Walt was already moving, rising to one knee to pour a burst of .30 caliber rounds into the nest. The bar's chatter filled the damp air, harsh and heavy. Chen's Garand cracked sharp beside me, each shot measured. A scream cut short inside the nest. A helmet popped up above the sandbags and then vanished as Walt's second burst found its mark. I scrambled up, dragging myself over the lip, rifle ready. Russo was beside me, coughing from the smoke, but pushing forward anyway. The nest was half-wrecked, sand spilling where the grenade had torn open one corner. One gunner lay slumped against the bags, the other trying to drag himself toward a side trench. I stopped him with a shout and a raised rifle. His hands went up, mud-slick and trembling. We left him where he was, too dangerous to trust but too wounded to fight. "Clear," I called back down. Walt climbed up last, breathing hard, the bar's barrel smoking. For a heartbeat, it felt like we had the crest. Then Morales scrambled up behind us with the radio still crackling static. His face was pale. "Sarge, we're not alone up here." Before I could ask what he meant, the earth ahead of us shifted. A section of ground that looked like part of the hill split open, revealing a narrow trench that cut across the crest like a hidden scar. From that trench rose the dull green curve of helmets and the dark mouths of rifles. The hill had more teeth, A whole squad crouched in a dug-in trench line we hadn't seen from below. "Down!" I barked. We dropped just as a volley ripped across the crest, bullets shredding the sandbags where we'd been standing. Dirt and splinters showered over us. Walt rolled to one side and returned fire in short, controlled bursts. Russo yanked a fresh grenade from his pouch and lobbed it toward the trench. It went wide, bouncing harmlessly off the far wall before exploding in empty dirt. Chen shifted to the right flank and fired into the smoke, buying us seconds of cover. I crawled to Morales and shouted over the gunfire. "Call it in. Tell Command the Hill's got a full trench line on the crest. We're pinned." He fought the radio, twisting the dial with muddy fingers. The handset spat nothing but static and half-words. The hill still smothered our signal. We were cut off. Doc slid into the shallow scrape beside me, his face streaked with mud. "2 men down in the trench from Walt's burst," he reported, "but they've got plenty more. We can't rush them without getting chewed up." I peered over the sandbags just long enough to glimpse the enemy shifting for another volley. There were more than I'd hoped, maybe a dozen, all protected by the trench's earthen walls. For a moment the wind died and I heard the distant thump of artillery somewhere behind our lines. Too far to help us, too far to matter. I ducked back down and looked at the men. "We hold here," I said. "Make them waste their fire. We stay small and we stay alive until someone hears us." The hill wasn't finished yet. It had saved its cruelest surprise for last. A trench on the crest, waiting for men who thought the fight was already won. The rain quit by mid-morning, but the wind carried a damp chill that seeped through our jackets. The fog that had hidden us was gone now, burned off by the pale sun, leaving the crest wide open under a bruised sky. From where we crouched behind the broken sandbags, the trench line cut across the top of the hill like a scar that refused to close. We had driven the gunners from the nest, but the men in the trench were still there, patient, disciplined, waiting for us to raise a helmet high enough to aim at. Every time one of us tried to peek above the sandbags, a rifle cracked and spat dirt close enough to sting. Walt propped the bar against the edge, ready for another burst. His helmet was streaked with mud, his jaw tight. "They're waiting on orders," he muttered. "Same as us." Russo wiped rainwater from his eyes. "Feels like we're just sitting ducks till somebody makes the first bad move." "Not us," I said. "We hold unless they break first. We've got cover, they've got the numbers." Behind us, Morales was still hunched over the radio like it might suddenly forgive him and work. The static hissed. Rose, died, hissed again. He shook his head. "Nothing, Sarge. It's like shouting into a pillow." I crouched next to him. "Keep trying. Rotate the antenna toward the valley. Maybe we'll catch the line." He nodded, jaw clenched tight. A lull settled in, the kind that makes every man listen too hard. I could hear the drip of water from the sandbags and the faint shift of boots in the trench above us. Even the crows circling overhead seemed to wait. Then the lull broke. A whistle cut the air, not ours, sharp and shrill from the trench line. Before we could brace, a burst of rifle fire and a spray of grenades came sailing over the lip. "Down!" I barked. We flattened as dirt and smoke leapt around us. One grenade landed just short of the sandbags and burst with a low, wet thump that rattled my teeth. Doc swore under his breath and crawled toward Walt, who was coughing in the cloud but gave a thumbs up to show he was unhit. Walt answered the volley with a savage burst from the bar, the weapon kicking hard against his shoulder as he swept the trench's edge. Russo joined him, picking targets as quickly as they showed their helmets. Chen shifted to the right flank and fired in short, crisp shots, forcing the enemy to duck. For a few seconds the hill roared with gunfire, echoing down the valley. Then the enemy surged. A handful of them clambered out of the trench, bayonets fixed, rushing low over the wet ground toward our battered nest. "Here they come!" Russo shouted. I slammed a fresh clip into my Garand, rose to one knee and fired into the charging figures. One dropped, another stumbled but kept coming. Walt raked them with the bar until the last man fell face down in the mud just yards from our sandbags. The brief charge failed, but it told us what we didn't want to know. They weren't just defending. They were testing our strength. Doc crawled up beside me, checking Walt's arm where a splinter of sandbag wood had cut through the sleeve. "He's good," Doc reported. "Nothing serious." I nodded, then glanced toward Morales. He was still fighting the radio, sweat streaking the mud on his face. "Sarge," he called. I think I got something. Wait, no, lost it again. The static mocked us, crackling like distant thunder. Chen shifted closer to me. If they charge again with more men, we won't hold without ammo resupply. I'm down to 2 clips. Make every shot count, I told him. We're not giving this hill back. I risked a quick peek over the sandbag line. The trench across from us was quiet again, but I could see movement, shadows shifting, helmets ducking low. They were reloading, regrouping, planning another push. Russo muttered, "They'll come harder next time." "Let 'em," Walt growled, settling the bar into the crook of his shoulder. "We'll mow 'em down." But I saw the worry in his eyes. We all felt the strain of the fight dragging out longer than any of us wanted. The hill seemed to press down on us, heavy and patient. I reached over and tapped Morales' shoulder. "Keep at that radio. If command hears us, maybe we live to see lunch." The young private gave a shaky grin and bent back to the dials. A fresh gust of wind swept across the crest, carrying the smell of wet earth and cordite. I watched the trench line and saw a green flare arc into the gray sky above them, a signal to someone we couldn't see. "Flare," I said quietly. "They're calling friends." We braced again, hearts hammering, waiting for the next wave. The morning light was spreading fast, stripping away every shadow we'd used for cover. We weren't hidden anymore. The hill wasn't giving up its ground. It was only just beginning to fight back. The flare's green glow hadn't faded before we heard them coming. Boots pounding against the trench boards. Short, sharp orders barked in German, metal clinking as rifles were loaded and bayonets locked into place. The hill felt like it was shaking itself awake for real this time. We hunkered down behind the ruined nest. Walt rested the bar on the last intact sandbag, the barrel still warm from the last burst. Russo crouched beside him, 2 grenades laid out on the mud like cards he meant to play soon. Chen checked the strap on his helmet twice, his face grim. Morales knelt behind us with the radio angled toward the valley, twisting the dial in tiny, desperate increments. The first push came sudden and close. A stick grenade sailed over the sandbags and landed in a puddle just short of us. Walt kicked it back over the crest with the reflex of a man who'd done it before. The blast went off mid-air, sending a spray of dirt across our helmets. Before we could breathe, 2 shadows rose from the trench and charged low across the slick ground. Russo's first shot dropped one. Walt's burst chewed into the other's legs and spun him down into the mud. For a heartbeat, the crest went quiet again. Doc's voice came from my left. "We can't bleed like this all day. They'll pick us apart a few at a time." "Then we don't bleed," I said. "We hold. Make them pay for every step," Morales called out softly. "Sarge, I think I've got a signal." "Wait, no. Gone again." His shoulders sagged, but he kept working the dial, stubborn as a mule. A second push followed, 3 men leaping the trench wall together. Chen dropped the first with a single shot. Walt's bar swept the other 2 before they were halfway across the open ground. Smoke drifted over the sandbags, stinging our eyes. We were holding, but every exchange cost us. I checked my Garand and counted only 5 rounds left in the clip. Chen was almost empty. Russo had 1 grenade left. Walt's last magazine lay in the mud beside him. The sky above the valley stayed gray and heavy, threatening more rain. We could see nothing beyond the hill but empty fields veiled in mist. No sign of our company. No help crawling up behind us. Just the static in Morales' headset and the occasional thump of far-off artillery that belonged to someone else's fight. A lull stretched long enough for us to hear the wind again, whistling low over the ridge. I dared a glance over the sandbags. The trench was quiet, but I caught a flicker of movement at its far end. 2 soldiers dragging a box, setting it up behind a row of stakes. "Machine gun," I muttered. "They're bringing in a spare." Walt tightened his grip on the bar. "Let 'em try." Russo shifted beside me. "If that gun gets set, they'll rake this whole crest. We won't be able to lift our heads." I nodded. "We stop it before it's ready." The plan formed quick and ugly. We'd use the lull to strike first. I motioned to Russo. "Last frag. Make it count. I'll cover you." Russo grinned the kind of grin men wear before doing something foolish and crawled low along the sandbag line, staying just under the enemy's line of sight. I rose just enough to draw their attention with a couple of quick shots. Bullets snapped back, clipping the top of the sandbag wall. Walt's bar barked in reply, forcing the rifleman down. Russo popped up near the far end of the wall, lobbed his grenade in a smooth arc toward the machine gun crew, then ducked back before the blast. The explosion punched a hole in the trench and sent a helmet spinning skyward. Their gun never fired a shot. Cheers didn't follow. We were too tired for that. Just nods and Russo's mud-streaked grin as he crawled back beside me. The enemy didn't push again right away. Instead, they settled into their trench, trading the occasional shot but mostly staying low. It felt less like they were beaten and more like they were waiting. Doc glanced at the horizon. Feels like noon's a week away. It was only a little after 10. I shifted against the sandbags, listening to the hill creak and breathe around us. My fingers were numb from the damp. My stomach hollow from the missed breakfast that now felt like another life. The men's faces were drawn, eyes rimmed red from rain and gunpowder. Somewhere in the valley below, a crow called once and went silent. I kept my voice steady when I finally spoke. We hold until the captain hears us. We've come too far up this damned hill to die rolling back down. No one argued. There was nothing left to say. The hour crawled on, slow as the mud drying on our sleeves, each minute stretched tight as wire. The hill gave us no comfort, no cover we hadn't already dug with our own bodies pressed into the earth. We waited, knowing the next push would be worse, because the hill wasn't finished yet. By noon, the clouds had thickened again, pressing low over the ridge until the light turned the color of lead. The air smelled of rain and cordite. We had held our scrape in the crest for hours, waiting for a break that never came. Morales sat hunched over the radio, twisting the dial with raw fingertips, lips moving in silent prayers. The set only hissed back at him. Russo and Chen shared what was left of a canteen, each sip just enough to wet their tongues. Walt cleaned the bar's barrel with a strip of his own sleeve. Doc crouched beside a wounded German we had dragged out of the ruined nest earlier. The man was unconscious, breathing shallow and not likely to last the hour. We heard the next attack before we saw it. The faint metallic clink of mortar tubes being set somewhere down in the trench. The muffled shuffle of boots taking position. A short barked order in German. "Mortars," I said, low enough that the men didn't flinch but heard me just the same. The first round whistled over the crest and hit 20 yards short, exploding in a shower of wet dirt and torn grass. The second came closer, shaking the sandbags and knocking Walt's helmet sideways. We ducked lower, ears ringing. "They're walking it in," Walt muttered, dragging the bar tight against his chest. "Hold," I said. "They'll soften us up first. We answer when the smoke clears." A third shell landed just behind our scrape, sending up a spray of mud that rained down over us. The concussion thudded in my chest. I felt the hill itself shudder beneath my palms. Then the trench below erupted with movement. A line of figures scrambled out, bayonets fixed, some firing from the hip as they climbed the slope. Behind them, more soldiers appeared at the trench edge, rifles cracking in support. "Here they come," Russo growled, pulling the pin on his last grenade. "Wait till they close," I said. "Make every round hurt." The hilltop roared to life. Walt's bar spat in 3-round bursts, cutting down the first wave before they were halfway up. Chen's Garand snapped beside me, each shot precise, each recoil rocking his shoulder. Russo lobbed the grenade in a short arc that landed among a cluster of charging soldiers, scattering them in a burst of black smoke and earth. Still they kept coming, stepping over their own fallen, driven by orders or by the stubbornness that comes when men think they almost have you. I rose to one knee and fired until my clip pinged empty, then dropped back behind the sandbag wall to reload. My fingers were slick with rain and grime. I fumbled the fresh clip before slamming it home. Doc crawled to Walt's side to pass him a spare magazine, his face tight with determination despite the bullets whining overhead. A shell burst closer this time, showering us with fragments of stone. I felt a hot sting across my cheek but ignored it. We had no time to count cuts. Walt shifted fire to the right flank, where 2 enemy soldiers had reached the lip of the crest. His burst caught one in the chest and knocked the other backward down the slope. Russo laughed once, a short, sharp sound, then ducked as a bullet clipped the edge of his helmet. The charge faltered at last. The few left standing threw themselves flat on the wet slope, pinned by our fire. Those who could still move crawled back toward the trench, dragging their wounded with them. For a moment, the hilltop went strangely quiet. the silence broken only by the hiss of rain and the distant rumble of thunder gathering over the valley. "That's not it," Chen said grimly. "They'll be back." I believed him. We all did. The attack had been reckless, too rushed. A probe, not the killing blow. I crawled over to Morales. He looked up, eyes wide and tired. "Still nothing, Sarge. I keep catching half a signal, then it fades." "Keep at it," I told him. "Somebody out there's got to be listening." He nodded, turning the dial another fraction, patient as a man picking a lock. Down in the trench, a new sound rose. The grinding clank of chains and metal. I peered over the sandbags and saw two silhouettes wrestling another heavy box into position. I realized with a sinking heart that it wasn't just another machine gun. They were hauling up more mortar shells. The sky chose that moment to break open. Rain came down in sheets hard enough to blur the far slope and soak us to the bone in seconds. The water poured off our helmets, filled the grooves between sandbags, turned the crest into a slick, muddy ditch. Doc muttered, "If the shells don't drown us, the hill might." Lightning flared somewhere beyond the valley, followed by a deep, rolling thunder that seemed to echo the war's own anger. I looked at my men, mud-streaked, soaked, eyes burning with exhaustion but still gripping their weapons. We had held so far, but the storm and the enemy together felt like one living thing determined to grind us into the hill. I tightened my grip on the rifle. "Stay sharp," I said. "They'll try again, storm or no storm." The rain kept falling, drumming on steel and earth alike, and the hill waited, as if the storm was only the signal for its next move. The storm turned the ridge into a river of mud. By late afternoon, the trench below us was half flooded, rainwater swirling around boots and bodies alike. The sky had sunk so low it felt like you could reach up and scrape it with a bayonet. Thunder rolled over the valley in slow, heavy waves. Morales hunched with the radio under his poncho. Not that it stayed dry. He coaxed the dial like it was a wounded bird, still praying for a signal. I had stopped asking for updates. His shaking head told me enough each time. Russo sat with his back against a sandbag, eyes fixed on the slope. His helmet had a fresh dent, his knuckles raw from clawing mud. Walt stripped the bar for the third time that day, keeping it clean though we had only a few rounds left. Chen was down to his last clip, and I had maybe 2 more. Doc moved between us like a shadow, checking cuts, pressing a rag against the graze on my cheek without saying a word. The enemy did not rush again. They waited until the rain eased to a drizzle, then sent another flare, red this time, arcing into the bruised sky. A signal. Through the mist I saw new shapes moving in the trench. Taller silhouettes hunched under the weight of a weapon carried between 2 men. I knew the shape. A tripod-mounted MG-42 with enough belts of ammo to cut a path through a forest. "They're bringing the big one," Walt muttered. He set the bar in place like a man laying down a card he hoped would win the game. I checked my rifle and forced my voice to stay even. "We break that gun or we don't leave this hill." Russo gave a short nod and patted the pouch that used to hold grenades. "Empty now. Guess we do it the hard way." The first burst from the heavy gun tore a chunk out of the sandbag wall, spraying wet earth across our faces. The sound was a raw metal scream that drowned out the thunder. We ducked low, hearts hammering, waiting for a pause that didn't come. "Walt!" I shouted over the racket. "Short bursts! Make 'em keep their heads down!" He popped up, fired 3 tight bursts, then dropped before the MG-42 could pin him. The exchange went back and forth, the hilltop flashing with muzzle fire in the fading light. A fresh mortar round whistled in and landed short of our position, throwing a fountain of mud that drenched Morales and nearly knocked the radio from his hands. He cradled it against his chest and cursed under his breath. "Still nothing," he called. "I can hear them, but they can't hear me." We had no more time for pleas. The next push came under cover of the machine gun's scream. A dozen figures climbing the slope, bayonets catching the last light of day. "Hold the line!" I roared. Chen fired until his clip pinged empty. Russo snatched up a fallen enemy rifle and joined in, his own Garand spent. Walt swept the slope with the bar, knocking 2 attackers down before the weapon jammed on a muddy casing. He cursed and slammed it against the sandbag wall to clear it. The fight closed in fast. 3 soldiers reached the crest and leapt over the sandbags. I met the first with the butt of my rifle, drove him back into the mud. Russo tackled another in a tangle of bayonets and fists, both of them rolling in the sludge until Doc kicked the German's weapon aside. The third lunged for Morales and the radio. Chen, empty-handed, swung his helmet like a club and dropped him where he stood. For a few heartbeats, it was all shouts and rain and steel against steel. Then the machine gun down in the trench went silent, not because it was out of ammo, but because it was reloading. That pause was all we had. "Now!" I yelled. Walt cleared the jam, popped up, and poured the last of his belt into the crew before they could slap in a fresh drum. The heavy gun sagged silent. The remaining attackers faltered, then slid back down the slope under our ragged fire. Silence returned in pieces. First the gunfire died, then the shouts faded, leaving only the hiss of drizzle and the rasp of our breathing. The hilltop was littered with torn sandbags, spent casings, and too many still shapes half buried in mud. Morales lifted the radio one more time, and for the first time all day a clear voice crackled through. "Alpha Squad, hold on, armor's inbound, hold your position." He laughed, a shaky, wet sound, and passed me the handset. I could hardly believe it myself. "This is Sergeant Hale," I said into the receiver. My voice sounded older than it had that morning. "We still hold the crest, we're low on everything. Tell the captain the hill's not just dirt. It's dug-in teeth and claws. But we're here." The reply came soft but certain. "Copy that. Sit tight. We're coming." I lowered the handset and met the men's eyes. Even through the exhaustion there was a spark. Not triumph exactly, but relief that we had survived the day. We stayed in the ruined nest until the light bled out of the sky. When the first friendly tanks rumbled into the valley below, their engines a distant promise, we finally let ourselves believe we might live to see another sunrise. I looked down at the soaked, torn map in my pocket, the one that still showed this hill as nothing more than a soft curve of ground with no name. The paper had lied. The hill had been real all along. If you followed us up this cursed slope, if you felt the mud, the fear, the weight of every inch we crawled, share this story. Leave a comment for the ones who held their ground when the map said there was none. And if you want to hear more stories like this, you know what to do.